Good evening, captive audience. This is Don Anderson, and I hope you all are doing well. I'm flying solo tonight, and for a while I'll be flying solo because, as you know by now, my partner in crime, Sonny Danforth, has retired, and she'll be joining us periodically when I can get her as a guest. But she's moving to Florida, and so it'll probably be mid-September before I can have her join. So for the time being, you have to like fly with me solo, and I hope to be maybe 75% as good as she was solo because she's a big act to follow, but I will try my best. So, got a ton of stuff to cover with you all this evening, and I'm going to try to be as organized about this as possible and not try to talk 100 miles an hour because I am want to do that. So, feel free to send me messages on chat so that I can know that you're there. That helps me to stay engaged, knowing that I'm not just talking to myself. So, thank you all very much for that. So, I thought the first thing I would talk about is a rant that I wrote. I do the dad rants, and I put a link on the chat line there for you all to see, so you can go back and look at that dad rant later. But essentially, what I thought I would open with is the name of that rant is entitled "Gaslighting and Mass Manipulation." So let me just go there for just a couple of minutes. So before starting it, to first recognize just what is the definition of gaslighting. And basically what gaslighting is it's telling a massive lie as loud and as long and as often as possible to get and then convincing people that that massive lie is true. I think it was Adolf Hitler that once said the bigger the lie the better. And as we've just experienced with the left wing of our government and the left wing of the political establishment, a massive amount of gaslighting has been done, and then the mass manipulation that occurred around it. So I thought it'd be useful to just tell that story just for a couple of minutes, and then get some historical examples of when that's happened in the past. And the reason that's really relevant and good is because we can learn from history. Once we see what's happened in the past, when we see that same pattern occur in the future, then we know that's coming and we're positioned to avoid it. So let's start with gaslighting. So the massive lie turn told often and early. Two of them come to mind. Number one, the massive lie that men can be women. And look at how they gaslit the public into believing that that could be true. Um, you look at what happened 4 or 5 years ago. We were dealing with Budweiser ads. We were dealing with Target stores. We were dealing with institutions telling us everywhere, TV, Hollywood, everywhere, that men could be women. You could literally go into a store, and in the case of some of these retailers, they were having clothing up front that were men's bikinis, for example, right? And they did this to such an extent that anyone who posited a different point of view was literally made to feel like they were wrong, they were mean, they were immoral, all of those things. They were homophobic. All of those terms were thrown at you, even when you were doing something was obviously untrue. And then the same thing occurred around the vaccine situation. So we're forced to take a vaccine that was untested, untried, no legal ramifications for it if anything went sideways. Companies forcing you to take the vax or you lose your job. Governments with governors behaving like tyrants, something that I thought I'd never see in this country, forcing people to put something in their body, which flies in the face of the Geneva Convention. That was all done to us. And I saw this term, and I can't remember who said it, but men lose their minds quickly and they regain their senses slowly as a result of gaslighting. And you can see that starting to happen now because now people are fighting back, and it's taken a while, but people are recognizing that that was wrong. And so now you see the legal establishment finally kicking into gear and supporting this. You see Supreme Court weighing in on these topics. You see universities being forced to apologize for doing that to the female swimmers, for example, at Penn. We see this everywhere. Large children's hospitals being sued and being forced to recognize that you can't just do these gender surgeries on people's children without their permission. By the way, all these outrages happened to us because we were literally gaslit by the left wing media establishment, which pretty much is the establishment, the CNN, ABC, MSNBC, ESPN, all the sports, all the Hollywood, all of the mouthpieces of society, big universities, public school systems, all of us did that to us. And they did it so rapidly. They told that big lie. They told us so hard. They told us so often. They were able to gain traction for a period of time. until people were able to slowly regain their senses. So it's useful to point out some historical examples where this has happened in the past, because I think it really helps you to see that this isn't the first time, it won't be the last time, nor the only time that this has ever happened. So you think about what Adolf Hitler did with the Jews in Germany, the most classic example of all. Generally, what happens with these people is they find a circumstance where things aren't going well, and the government's looking for somebody to blame. So in Germany, you had the hyperinflation, you had the massive depression as a result of the Versailles Treaty. Uh, Food was literally hard to get in Germany in the 1930s. They suffered from a Great Depression as massive, more massive than the one, far more massive than the one we had here. So who was the fall guy? Well, the reason they lost the war became the Jews. And they hung that around the Jews' neck, said the Jews were the cause for the loss of the war. The result of that was, Hitler wound up slaughtering some 6 million Jews. You take a look at what happened in Rwanda. Similar circumstances happened there. Economy was going bad, really bad socialist run government. Economy was in terrible shape. So who do they want to blame? I think in this case, it was the Hutus blaming the Tutsis, wind up wiping out 700,000 of them in the 90s. Same thing with Turkey. In around 1912, they did the same thing to the Armenians, wiped out 2 million Armenians. Stalin did the same thing with the kulaks in Ukraine. Ukraine just keeps coming up again and again, doesn't it? It wound up starving to death 6 million kulaks, Ukrainians, because they were the cause of Germany, of Russia's problems. So we see this sort of thing happening over and over again in history. And when you see that kind of gaslighting going on, if we know that, if we're educated to it, to use the street parlance, if we're hip to it, then we're going to be in a better position to avoid it the next time it comes around, because they will use it once again. And thanks, Pam and Susan, for letting me know that you're here. Glad you are here with me. So I thought that'd be a great place to start. But now that we've kind of launched with that, it's time to talk about some really good news, because there's so much good news going on. As Trump would say, you're going to get tired of winning. I don't know if I'll ever get tired of winning, because it feels awfully good after 4 years of being pounded by the Biden administration. So here are some just really fun things that I went and looked up over this past week. Let's start with the economy. Wall Street has seen epic historic growth. Just a couple of indicators. The NASDAQ grew 0.9% over the last week. S&P 500 grew 0.6%. Dow Jones grew 0.5%. I mean, companies are blowing the doors out. And remember, the leftist press was telling us that this wasn't supposed to happen. Remember, they were yelling at us about what was going to happen to the price of gas. Why are eggs so expensive? All the things that were caused by Biden, they were trying to hang around Trump's neck, and they're trying to say tariffs were just going to make it worse. When in fact, tariffs had no impact at all. In fact, just recently, he just hung a 50% tariff around the necks of Brazil and about a half a dozen other countries, and the economy keeps humming along. A couple of other things. Associated Press just reported U.S. job openings in May hit 7.8 million. In the face of all of this negative press and in the face of the tariffs, this has happened anyway. Summer gas prices, this was reported just in a Florida paper, have dropped to the lowest mark in 4 years. Now, remember, this is happening right when the summer driving season is kicking in. This is usually when prices go up. In spite of that, prices are going down. You can only imagine what gas prices are going to be this fall when the summer driving season is over. This is absolutely amazing. In fact, in Florida, gas was selling for as low as $2.77 a gallon. Unfortunately, we're here in the Northwest, where we have this leftist, socialist, communist type governors who impose a whole lot of state taxes. So if you're in Oregon or Washington, you're not seeing gas prices below $3. But I recognized the other day, I just paid less than $4 for gas, which out here is phenomenal. So we're really getting a lot of massive benefit from the economic changes that are taking place. And we're what? Are we even 6 months into this administration? It's absolutely incredible. The tariffs, it's been amazing in terms of what they've been able to generate. And this is a really great thing to consider. The tariffs have resulted in a tremendous trade surplus in terms of the amount of money coming in. So the U.S. Treasury reported $27 billion budget surplus for June. That's right, not million, 27 billion with a B trade surplus in June. That is absolutely crazy. In fact, what they're anticipating at the Treasury Department is we could have a $300 billion in revenue from tariffs alone by the end of 2025. Now let's stop back and think about the implications of that. Because if that is true, if things keep going this way, That's going to provide the Trump administration with justification for making a legislative move to literally get rid of the income tax, which sounded like a pipe dream not that long ago, to get rid of the income tax and replace it with tariffs, which is the way things ran back in the McKinley administration, what, a little over 120 years ago. The country did great without any income tax at all. And the beautiful thing about that is an income tax punishes producers. If we were able to eliminate the income tax, reward producers for what they were producing, and then it'd be essentially a consumption tax, is what you would have. Then you'd be in control over how much taxes you paid, because if you didn't want to have taxes, then you just didn't consume stuff, right? And the beautiful thing about that is it takes power away from the federal government, which is probably the most important thing about a maneuver of that nature. And what we're doing now, or what the Trump administration is doing now, is building the ground rules, or building the justification for being able to do that. If a year or two from now, or let's say we're past the midterms, and we've been able to show that there's a huge amount of money in the coffers that has resulted from these tariffs, and the economy is doing really well anyway, then it becomes very easy sell to go to the American people and say, we can get rid of the income tax and replace it with the cash flow from tariffs. How could you be against that? That would be a no way you could defend not doing it. And I think that's the direction we're headed. So keep your eyes open around that. I am really excited about that possibility. This could be the biggest change in American history since what Franklin Roosevelt did to us with the with his New Deal. This would be far better than a New Deal, though. Rather than being a new socialist deal, this would be the new capitalist deal. So be on the lookout for that. And I think because of all of these positive things I've just described to you, we're also seeing polling trends headed in the right direction. And this is really great news. So think of this: voter registration. Nobody's talking about that right now because we're not in an election season. But for the first time in probably American history, the number of new registrations are exceeding Republican new registrations are exceeding Democrat new registrations. Now think about the implications of that for a minute. For example, I think it was in North Carolina. No, I'm sorry, looking at New Jersey. In New Jersey, last January, there were 10,000 new Republicans, people who registered as Republicans. Only two, and Democrats lost 2,000 registrations. So that's a swing of 12,000 people. So historically, there's always been more, like roughly 5% more Democrats registered as voters than Republicans. Imagine if there's, for the first time in history, nationally, there's more people registered as Republicans than Democrats. And the other trend that's in the favor of Republicans is that Republicans are winning in terms of the number of young voters, which is great because, let's face it, young people are just going to be around a lot longer than us old people. So if you win that and start winning that vote now, that's a generational thing. And all the trends are headed in that direction. So conservatism is winning because people can see with their own eyes and ears that socialism and communism doesn't work. We can talk logic, we can talk theory till the cows come home. Sometimes people need to be hit in the face with the reality of these policies before they'll actually respond to it. And I think that's what we're seeing in real time. People are responding to that. There's yet one other thing that I think is fascinating too to look at with regard to the fact that we have a census coming up in 2030. And with census comes reapportionment. And just take you through a little bit of civics lessons once again, for those of you who may have forgotten. Every 10 years, we do the census. Based on the census, we determine how many congressmen each state gets. Not senators, but legislators. And that's based on the population. And one thing that I didn't realize, never stopped and thought about it thoroughly, is it's not based on the number of citizens, it's based on the population, which I think is a huge miss, because this tells you why Democrats are so hot to trot around getting as many illegal aliens in the country as possible. Because whether they are registered to vote or not, they flood the countries with these illegals and they're counted. So you take a state like California. Maybe there's, I'm making this number up, I don't know this for sure. Maybe there's 5 million illegals running around California. And they're not citizens, but they're counted as if they were citizens for the sake of reapportionment. So California winds up getting additional electoral votes based on non-citizens. Doesn't it make a lot more sense that the electoral votes that you get should be based on the number of citizens? And I'm hoping that somewhere along the way that can finally be reversed. But here's kind of the good news of that, though. Because these blue states are run so badly, people are fleeing them massively. In other words, their populations are going down, and the populations of red states are going up. So let me just read off some of these numbers for you because I think they're absolutely amazing. So here's the projection for 2030 in terms of what's going to happen with reapportionment. So California is set to lose 4 electoral votes. Oregon will lose 1. Wisconsin 1. Michigan 1. Illinois 1. Pennsylvania 1. New York 2. Rhode Island 1, for a total of 12 electoral votes lost. The states where they're going to: Idaho gets 1, Utah gets 1, Arizona gets 1, North Carolina 1, Texas gets a whopping 4, and Florida get a whopping 4. So this tells you the direction that people are leaving. And then one other thing you have to keep in mind: the people who are leaving, these aren't just your regular citizens. These are the productive people who are leaving, the people who want to work who are leaving, the people who are paying the taxes who are leaving, which means these blue states are only going to get poorer and they're only going to get worse off. But the advantage in this is more electoral votes, and you combine that with the direction that registration is headed. I see potential landslides should these trends continue, not just at the midterm, but the next general election as well. So this is all great news. And to give you a sense for what that would look like, had those numbers been in place at the last election, so had those numbers we just described been in place, here's what it looked like. So Trump beat Harris 312 to 226 in the 2024 Electoral College. If this reinforcement had happened before that election, Trump would have beat Harris 322 to 216. So that gap would have been that much wider had this reapportionment happened. And it looks like that's the direction that we're headed. And I think it might even be a greater redistribution than that for a number of reasons I'm going to get into in just a moment. So I turn my page here because I'm old and I can't remember all of this stuff, right? So think about the impact that ICE is going to have on all this as well. Because as a result of the BBB, the big, beautiful new bill, $31 billion has been added to the ICE, 37 billion rather, dollars have been added to the ICE budget. To give you a sense for just how big that is, the entire defense budget for Canada was $37 billion. So that's a lot of bucks. It also tells you how little Canada spends on its own defense, but that's a whole other story. To give you a sense for how big that is, that's 10,000 new ICE agents on the ground. That's more ICE agents than the amount of DEA and FBI agents combined, just to give you an idea how big that is. So think about what that's going to look like. And it's going to take a while for those people to get hired and trained to be in the field. But let's say a year from now, that's the case. So all of these protests you see on the streets, all of these places where you see DEI agents getting attacked, a lot of that's because they're not staffed to deal with it. Well, they're going to be staffed to deal with that a year from now. And we're going to see a huge change in terms of the way ICE agents are treated and in terms of the number of people who are being escorted out of the country. In fact, I think the mere recognition that there's this many ICE agents is going to cause a whole lot of people to self-deport. And self-deporting is a lot less expensive than us going out and catching them. So there's a huge amount of positives associated with that. So you can see how these things are going to start to feed on themselves. As these people self-deport, the populations of blue states are going to go down, which means their number of electoral representation is going to go down, which means that red states are going to have more influence in the outcome of general elections. Furthermore, I believe you're going to also see within blue states themselves, they're going to become more red because the vote of those citizens in those blue states like California has been diluted by all of this illegal immigration. So there's some positives in there for them as well. Because remember, in most of these blue states, the states are barely blue. They're only blue because of the major cities in them. So if you took out LA County, if you took out San Francisco County in California, you took out Pierce County and in King County in Washington State, if you took out Multnomah County, and you take out Lane County in Oregon, these are all red states, and they're not blue by that much. So I think, granted, I might sound a little Pollyannish, I feel very positive about some great things that are about to happen at the midterms and then again in the general. So there's some real positive things that we have to look forward to. So, moving right along, and this takes us to these federal raids that have been occurring. I think they're a huge positive. One of the things that we hear all the time, and I've always thought this was kooky, and I finally was able to get my verbiage around how I would deal with this. And this is the argument that the reason we need to have illegals because they'll do jobs that Americans won't do. Now, this is one of the most racist things I've ever heard when you think about it. So the implication is that Hispanics will pick lettuce for us because they can't do anything but pick lettuce, and we won't do that. And this is like a horrible argument to make, but these Democrats will look you straight in the eye and make that racist argument without even blinking. Having said that, I think there's a lot of falsehoods associated with that. Americans will do those jobs. They just won't do them $5 an hour, right? And and a lot of these illegals they get paid under the table, and plus they send that money back to Mexico on top of that, which doesn't do any good for us. And then on top of that, the Mexican government has the audacity to tax them for the money that they send back. So let me get this right. So you run a government that's run so badly that the citizens there can't stay in their own country. They have to leave the country in order to make a decent living. And then when they do make a decent living, to send money back to their relatives so they can survive your evil government, you tax them on the money they sent back. I mean, it's atrocious no matter how you slice it. But one of the great things I think I see this coming to an end as more and more people see that it doesn't make sense to stay here with ICE breathing down your neck, number one. And number two, the Trump administration beginning to tax the money that is sent back to Mexico because that money is not helping the American citizen. It doesn't circulate in the United States. It goes back, and it really doesn't help the Mexican citizens back there because they basically find a way to fund the cartels and keep a terrible government in power. So there are huge amounts of positives associated with that. But then circling back to this whole argument around this jobs thing, so they say that Americans won't do these jobs. Yes, Americans will do those jobs. They just won't do them for those wages. So when those illegals leave the country, that'll force the wages to go up because of supply demand. There's too much supply in order for that labor to happen. When that supply leaves, it will force these employers to pay more. Now, the other arguments, the will say, well, Don, that's going to cause a whole lot of inflation. And I don't buy that. But let's just for a second say, for the sake of the argument, that that was true. So let's say that those employers had to pay that we had to pay more for goods and services as a result of illegals being kicked out of the country. What that doesn't take into account, though, are what are the general costs of the overall country of having illegals in the country. Those costs are going to be offset by the costs we're paying for that. And what I'm referring to is the additional stress on the medical system, the additional stress because of all the crime on the legal system, the additional stress on the housing. This is one of the things people don't think about. One of the reasons why the rents are so high is because you have too many people chasing too few apartments, which drives apartment prices higher. So now those citizens who are trying to get launched out in life, those young kids, young adults, they can't afford the rent because there's too many people in the country who have no business being here, which drives the rent higher. So the benefit of having a housing market that's better balanced, a legal system that's like overly stressed with a whole lot of illegals, a prison system that's not stressed by a whole lot of illegals committing crimes. So law enforcement is stressed, medical system taking care of people that don't belong here that we're paying for, a school system that's being stressed by people that don't even speak the language. All of those systems are being stressed, and the people that are most impacted by that are the poor white people, poor brown people, and poor black people in our own country. So this would benefit them. And I think more and more of them are seeing this, and this resonates. So it actually is overall, it's a better economic choice for us, even if there were inflation, which I don't think there will be, for the country to make this move. So that's one argument I never hear people make, and I think it's a very valid argument that ought to be made. So take notes on that one. Next time you get in a debate or discussion with one of your liberal friends, then you have now more ammunition to, in your more armamentarium for your guns, if you will, in order to make that intellectual debate. For those few who are capable of making an intellectual debate anyway, you will have that. So a couple of other things here, and I'm kind of coming to the home stretch here. back to that big, beautiful bill, there's a couple of things in it that I think aren't often talked about that I think need to be talked about. One of the big ones is this SNAP, which essentially, I can't remember what that stands for, but it's basically the welfare payments. So, one of the things in this bill is it's going to require able bodied people who get this money between the ages of 18 and 54, they got to spend 80 hours a month volunteering, working, or looking for a job. Imagine that. You would assume that that would be the case anyway, but that's not the case. We have a tremendous number of able bodied people who, as we say at home, are just laying up, not doing anything, and collecting this check. We need to go back to making sure that the people who get this are people who are truly disabled, and the people who are able-bodied are out there trying to work or trying to do something to help themselves. So that's one of the changes that's being introduced as a part of this bill. Also, the bill is widening the window. So it's between age 18 and 54. They're going to expand it to 18 to 64. So if you're able-bodied, and you can work, then you should be working, or at a minimum, you shouldn't be stealing from your fellow citizens who are working to finance you sitting on the couch. So I think that is a huge positive. We want to reward production and penalize non-production. And this is one of the ways that we need to do that. The other thing that's in this bill that I find so exciting is the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Now, granted, it only does that for the first year, but the mere fact that we finally put that on the chopping block, why are we forcing people to pay for something they are 100% from a religious perspective completely in disagreement with? If you want to pay for that, it's a completely immoral thing in our view, or the view of religious conservatives. Then you can pay for that sin yourself, but don't take my money to pay for it. And that's the position. It shouldn't happen anyway. But that's the position I would say we definitely ought to take and have taken. And it's just great that we finally have an administration that listens. We've had so many rhino Republicans come along, and in every election, they sing from the hymnal around getting rid of Planned Parenthood and not funding abortion. As soon as they get your vote and get in office, they forget about you. I think this is the first president that I can think of in my memory who's actually acted on it. And just like everything else, he actually follow throughs on what he says he's going to do. And it's just, I can't tell you how excited. And the same thing with NPR. There's no reason why there should be public radio. They can go out there and compete like everybody else. They can make money and win or lose on their own dime. If you can't make it, then you ought to go under, just like everybody else. There's no reason that should be government funded. And I would say the same thing if it was a conservative station. If they were a conservative station, the liberals' tax dollars should not be going, they should not be forced to pay for stuff that they don't believe in, and it's not a necessary public good. And the same thing applies on the other side. Of course, as it were, we've never seen anything government funded that was conservative. I can't think of a single thing that falls into that hat. So that's, anyway, I thought a nice another piece of news that's not often talked about around this bill. So sports fans, that's a half hour. That went by a lot more quickly than I thought. That was an action-packed half hour. I hope you enjoyed it. I look very much forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. Good night, everybody.